Hello, welcome to the Integrated Care Podcast from the Collaborative Family Healthcare Association. I am apparently Grace Pratt, and I'm joined by three of my co-hosts this morning, and we have a great show lined up for you. I'm actually coming to the team with the consult, which is one of my favorite things to do because there are no brighter, more compassionate, and knowledgeable people that I love to strategize problems through than this group right here. But first, we are going to start with an icebreaker, the way we always do to get to our introductions. And I'm curious to hear because I took my kids last week was spring break in Oklahoma. And myself and my 7-year-old and my 3 6-year-olds made a 9-hour road trip to Colorado to visit some friends in Colorado Springs, some mutual friends of ours and our listeners, our former co-host, Dr. Christine Borst and her family. And the boys did great. They were troopers, but it was a really fun spring break. And I have some, new favorite spring break memories from that trip. So with apologies to Bridget's spring allergies, my icebreaker question for you is, what is a favorite spring break memory that you have? Could be from childhood, could be recently. Oh my gosh, this cat. But what are you loving about spring break or memory? This is going to be a weird energy today, listeners. I just need to apologize in advance. Okay, let's move on. Jen, please introduce yourself. Yes. Tell us about spring break. And I'm going to put this on you.
We're dealing with allergies, cats.
Yep. That time of year.
Family issues. We're good. We're good.
Yeah, all good. All right. Well, hi, I'm Jen Thomas, family medicine. I work at Morris Hospital in Morris, Illinois, integrated care, behavioral health director. Spring break memories. I don't know, like growing up, I grew up in Southern Illinois. We didn't get like a real spring break. We had like a day before Easter and the day after. So like that wasn't a thing for me till like college. And I was a nerd. So we like didn't, do any like Fort Lauderdale type stuff. But a couple of years ago, my husband and I took our 2 oldest kids down to see spring training in Florida. We're St. Louis Cardinal fans. So that was awesome. Like we got to see 3 games. We hit I think it was the Kennedy Space Center. We did like space NASA stuff down in Florida and it was awesome. Definitely crocodiles. So I remember that we were taking the little like shuttle out to see the launch pad and there's just like crocodiles hanging out alongside the road. And my oldest was like deathly afraid. So she was like, I'm never gonna live in Florida. Because those crocodiles are just like hanging out on the side of the road like squirrels down there. So, but yeah, that was super fun. We had a really good time.
That is super fun.
Yeah, it was good. It was good stuff. Got to do it again.
Break. I love behind the scenes things personally, like give me a director's commentary or like a behind the scenes of something. And I'm so there for it. And so the idea of like going to see spring training, that's just the very behind the scenes prep is like so appealing to me, even as a very casual fan of baseball.
Yep. We like totally went all nerdy and were like autographs and like, oh, it's the famous ones up close. And the kids just loved it. It was really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So next around the circle here, we have Neftali Serrano.
Hey, everyone. Yes, I'm the CEO here of the Collaborative Family Healthcare Association. Really nice to be back on the podcast. I feel like it's been a while. So I miss you guys. I miss our audience. So spring break is lots of really good spring break memories. First of all, Grace, I mean, a 9-hour trip with those ages, you deserve like an award of some sort, a Nobel Peace Prize.
For real.
And then it makes it even worse when I tell you that for some reason the map took me the long way across the Oklahoma Panhandle, which has to be the most boring drive in existence.
Yes, I've done that. I've done that. Yes. Oh my goodness, it's so flat. It's unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah, so just like lots of great memories, but one that comes to mind, my oldest daughter, who's now in college. At the time, I think she was in middle school or maybe early, like freshman high school. And we went to Virginia, and I forget the name of the town. It's like that historic town where all the colonial stuff is. Oh, it's Williamsburg, right? Colonial Williamsburg. And she is such just a geek and nerd around like history and things like that. And so even as like a teen, she like wanted to dress up, you have an option, like when you go in, you can pay extra to like put on colonial clothes and walk around in colonial
Nice.
clothes. And so you can imagine like the white bonnet and like the dress and all that. And she was just so into it. Like she loved it so much. The thing was that I had my other two kids with me as well. It was just me and them. My wife was probably working. And the other one, who was like a preteen at that point, was absolutely mortified that she had to be around her sister, who's wearing these, colonial
costume.
cars. So it was just humorous as a parent to see like one kid just having the time of their life geeking out, and another one who couldn't walk within 10 feet of her sister because, she's like the fashionista.
Yeah.
Siblings, man.
Did you partake too with like the costuming, like the Hamilton style with like the high socks and the long coat?
I would have, but at that point, cheap me kicked in, and I was like, I can't afford to pay another $100 just to wear a costume all day. So,
but it would have looked good. You would have rocked it.
That's amazing. And then next we have Bridget Beachy.
Yeah, and I was thinking how we've now changed to YouTube, and when you talk, it's that real up close look up. Maybe I should put it further away. But anyway, I woke up with some allergy situation in my eyes, so you guys are, I guess, gonna have to deal with that anytime I talk. I'm a psychologist by trade, work as a behavioral health consultant at an FQHC, and yeah, spring break. I was racking my mind in high school. Spring break was always when track was starting, and growing up in Northeast Ohio in March time, I mean, what you got normally was some type of like freezing rain,
sleet,
ice pellets to your face with wind. You're just running on that track and feeling sorry for yourself. And I remember that a lot. And I remember thinking, like, I never went on spring break in high school because I always had sports. And then I don't know what happened in college. I don't think we got very many days. And then we did get in college. I played basketball. That was my main sport. And I hadn't played softball since I was a freshman in high school. There's a big feud with like the coaches, and you kind of almost have to specialize. I went to a real big high school. Anyway, so I just didn't play softball for all those years, and I decided in my last year at in undergrad that I was going to play softball, and so I ended up starting a huge chunk of games in left field, and played. It was designated player, which was where you bat, but you didn't always play in the field.
Nice.
So I either did that or I played in left field, and we went down to Florida on a bus and did a little like. I don't know. That's where we had our first games, and it was really awesome and fun.
Awesome. Yes, I love that. Yeah, I identify with the track thing. My husband teaches high school and coaches girls track. So every April we're out there, we're in Northern Illinois, and it is, nice the day before, sunny. The day of the meet, we're out there, end of April, and coats and boots and gloves freezing, and it's rain pellets your face. Heck yes. That's part of the grit, I think, of those track athletes. God bless them. So
well, I wanted to share one highlight from our trip to Colorado is that Henry, my oldest, really the only thing he wanted to do was go on a hike. And James was a little worried about that because he didn't think he could work a pickaxe. And so he thought maybe that might not be good for him. But I told him, don't worry, we'll pick a hike with no pickaxes, because giving a 6-year-old a pickaxe is not high on my list of priorities as a parent. So we went to Garden of the Gods, and we went on this little hike, and immediately Henry started complaining. And I was like, look, man, this is all your idea, so you better get on board. And then the other funny thing was that we got a little bit further, and Alex grabbed his tummy and said, oh no, I'm mountain sick. And so they just kept us laughing the whole time. And yeah, it was fun. If you have to make a 9-hour road trip with a bunch of little children, I highly recommend driving a mini van and letting them binge watch their favorite show. We watched Pokemon all the way there and back, and everyone was happy. So that's my secret.
Minivan's where it's at. We have 4
Oh my
too.
God,
You
I
can't
love
get a
my
minivan
van.
these days. They're like crazy, like off the line, and there's such a hot commodity. I'm like, when did the minivan become the cool car? I guess we're all aging and
I
stuff,
love my
but
van.
it's a
Yes.
thing.
Neftali, are there news and notes for today?
Of course, there's always stuff going on here at CFHA. So our spring conference is coming up April 19th through the 20th. It's a conference that's virtual, and it's focused in on helping folks really build their careers. And I think of it as a sort of a time to meditate on your career. That's the way we're trying to create space for people to just pause and think about what they need to make for a good, satisfying, long career, hopefully in integrated care. So you can find that information out at integratedcareconference.com. That's integratedcareconference.com. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to transition us into our main segment today, and I'm going to start with consult. So unfortunately, usually it can be fun to bring you a story that's happened recently at our clinic, or something that's got me thinking about, what might be good for us to talk about. But we had a really difficult situation with a patient earlier this week who came in, and for a whole variety of factors and contexts that sort of come out afterwards, was pretty immediately very angry, very disruptive, and pretty violent towards our staff and the resident who was seeing him in clinic that day. And he was shown out of the clinic, but there were even some rumblings of whether he had made threats when he was being taken out of the clinic. And it's been a heavy situation. It was hard on our staff. It's been hard on our resident. And I think it's hard on our team as a whole. And of course, our heart is still with the patient and the patient care. But I gave this, I may end up retitling the episode, but I gave you guys the heading of angry patients. I think this is a little more nuanced than that, like everything that we end up talking about. But what I'm curious about is, how can we think about what this looks like in integrated care, and what it looks like clinically and with respect to the team, and also how integrated teams may be especially equipped to work in supporting patients who maybe are having this kind of disruption or difficulty. So with that prompt, I'm just curious to open up to you guys and see, what immediately floats to the top of thoughts that you have.
Well, I think one of the things I think of is this is actually a great sort of use case or reason for having well-developed teams, right? Because if you think about this, I mean, primary care providers deal with angry and or disgruntled patients pretty frequently. I mean, like it's not an uncommon thing to have a patient who's at the very least disappointed, if not outright angry and hostile at times. And so the burden of that typically is directed at the primary care provider. And that's one of the things that really can lead to burnout and just lead to just a sense of disaffection and a hardening for primary care providers who have to kind of deal with this. We dealt a lot with this in the early 2000s during the height of the opioid epidemic, because there were so many patients coming in asking for pain meds, and clinics at that time did not have the kinds of barriers and boundaries, and different providers had different boundaries around different things as far as prescribing patterns and all of that. And then patients under the influence of addiction are definitely prone to more sort of dramatic outbursts, anger, etc. And you had so many providers struggling hard around what to do, and I saw it really affect my colleagues. I mean, it was just really, really tough. But what's really cool when you have a well-integrated team with a member of that team, especially, who has skills in the area of like dealing with human affect and understanding sort of context around behavior, like that person then helps to provide leadership for your team. And when I say team, I'm talking about like including of your receptionists, because they're getting angry patients up there, your medical assistants, your nurses doing triage on the phone, obviously your providers on the back end, et cetera, right? So you have someone that those folks feel like they can consult right away to kind of, strategize. How do we as a team respond to this? Man, that makes a huge difference, as opposed to one person who's busy and trying to just like move on to their next patient, having to manage, all of that. And then going home later on that day and feeling crappy about it, right? Because that's it's a bad experience for you, but you also feel crappy about, the patient. They must be really upset if they got to that level where they had to be escorted out of a thing. So I think that's the first thing that comes to mind is like, yeah, this is exactly a use case for why we need teams and why we need someone on that team who has that kind of expertise.
Yeah, I think Grace, you're saying it's nuanced as far as, it sounds like this patient unfortunately got to the point where very aggressive, which makes it definitely more difficult. Because I think for your whole host of, more patients who are acting out in some way, maybe with rude comments or kind of escalating behavior, BHCs, we actually, like, the whole clinic does like kind of, they'll get put on a behavioral contract essentially. It's like the care coordinators, clinic manager, and then there's always a BHC there, and we offer them BHC services. It's trying not to be punitive. It's trying to be very preventative and very proactive, and like, hey, we understand that, or we can imagine that you're going through a lot of difficult things, maybe in some cases chronic pain, and we want to be able to support you because we want to keep you at our clinic as much as possible. We've had so many success stories where folks were able to de-escalate situations. The patient themselves get de-escalated, and now they're able to come to our clinic without, incident. But then sometimes it hits a threshold where it's like falls more into the harassment, the threats, and the like straight up like violence. And in those situations, then it's more kind of there's less problem solving about what we're going to do in that exact moment, it seems like, and more just support on the back end, because it doesn't seem like in some of those situations, if it gets to that point, it kind of is like there's not really much you can do about it. I mean, I'm sure there are things you can do about it, but it seems like if somebody is getting to the level of like threats, it kind of goes beyond, I think, unless I'm wrong, and then beyond what I think I can really help with.
Yeah, I think that's where there comes such a conflict in principles in terms of we want to, and maybe it's not a conflict, but like we want to treat this patient and like understand the complexity of their situation. And, in this case, this was the patient's very first visit to our clinic, and all of it changed within like 10 minutes of him arriving. So, I think the answer to a lot of this and what you were starting to point to, Bridget, is the relationship and how we're connecting with people and how we're communicating expectations and how we are providing support for those contextual factors that maybe are influencing the behavior and seeing the behavior as a function. But sometimes things change so quickly, or things start with such intensity that we have to like see the humanity and protect the people on our team too. And I think that's where it can feel to me like such a conflict of, I want to have so much compassion for this person and their, all of the factors that are leading into their behavior. And also I see my team members who I want so deeply to be safe. And there was a case in Oklahoma earlier this year of a shooting in a healthcare facility where a patient came and 2 doctors were killed. And so I think that is also, relevant on our minds and feels close to home. And so that piece of we need to be safe and we want to be safe in this work. And also there's a lot of unpredictability in our world and larger societal systemic problems. And it's I get left feeling really stuck.
It's tough. It's tough. It's so tough. And even when you do make that decision, you kind of wonder, was that the right call? Like, had we de-escalated, would we have gotten to the point where we had to discharge? Could I have handled it better? I mean, a lot of primary care clinics don't have BHCs, and we don't have a good mechanism. So like, I think a lot of providers, we go on the defensive. So it's like the minute someone does something that violates patient expectations, what card do we have to play besides the discharge card? And then it's right there, your adversaries. You're not even thinking about de-escalating and trying to figure out something you said, Bridget, last time, like, why does that behavior make sense? Oh my gosh, like I wish someone had taught me that years ago of like, okay, that's why that person acted out. It's not about me saying no to the Norco, but it feels that way when someone gets in your face. And I've had people literally get in my face, threaten me to my face, and it didn't go well. It ended up escalating. They're discharged, the police are involved, they get charged with disorderly conduct, and it just turns into this whole traumatic, what the heck are we doing? And maybe it could, maybe it wouldn't have, right? If we had a BHC come in the room and help de-escalate, it's like, wow, maybe we could have avoided all that. And it's scary because then you don't know, like, right, was this the right call? Because you know that person, if we discharge in a small town with access to care and maybe, whatever type of insurance, like, where are they going to go? Their mental health and substance use problems are still there, and they still live down the street in this small town. So now what? Have we made that person better? Probably not, so it's so hard. It's so hard to feel like you're finding boundaries and you got conflicting, agendas from your team, right? Well, they can't talk to my team like that. And no, we should talk to people respectfully. So it's so hard to find that balance of like, what's the right call? It's not an easy answer for sure.
Yeah, you painted a great picture there, Jen. I'm glad you gave the color to that, because it is that visceral sometimes, right? And it is that sort of confusing in the way that trauma is often confusing, right? I mean, that's the way it is, right? We have this mix of like, could I have done something like to avoid this trauma, whatever it is. And that is what it feels like. There's this inner conflict that is really, really, wow, I mean, for lack of a better word, is traumatizing. Like, and I think that's another important I think step that clinics need to remember, that post these events, like, there should be some outlet or some opportunity for the team to kind of process this, because people are going home with that feeling of inner conflict. And no matter how black and white the situation may have even been, you still have that second guessing and that questioning because of the extreme of the human behavior. I think the other thing I was reacting to when you were talking is I've seen both sides, right? So there's certainly a side where I would tout integrated care and having that expert on the team be a big plus for de-escalation. But the other side is, we can't solve every human issue, right? And in those cases, what I've found myself doing for our teams is helping our teams feel good about setting the boundary, is saying, nope. If you do a good case conceptualization, right? That's what I teach my clinicians always. You've got to have a good understanding of the why of the behavior, right? And if you understand the why of the behavior, and the why of the behavior is something like, this person is not in control of their own mental and behavioral faculties. They cannot be reasoned with. They're, then attempting de-escalation techniques is not going to work, right? If that's your conceptualization like that, it's not going to work. At that point, you have to go into, firm boundary and safety setting mode, right? We need to protect our team. We need to protect our patients in this space. And then that's when you have to have really good policies in place to know exactly how to move someone safely out of this space. And then for the team to feel like, okay, we did the right thing. Felt yucky, but we did the right thing, Right. So I don't want to give people out there the false impression that like, oh, we can solve every problem and de-escalate every single situation. Absolutely not.
Right.
Plenty of times when you just have to set the good boundary and say, no, this is not acceptable in this environment.
I think one thing that, I don't know if this is what you said, Bridget, or just something I was thinking based on what you said, but there's a whole spectrum of uncomfortable feelings that can come from patients in terms of, people that are disappointed and then frustrated and then upset and then angry and then hostile. Like that's a wide range. And you were talking, I think what made me think of this is when you were talking about behavioral contracts and having very clear communication of expectations, trying to intervene as early as possible. And I think there's a piece of us, a piece of me for sure, and many of the healthcare providers that I've worked with, that in the early stages, when the patient's like just a little frustrated or just a little disappointed, you kind of just want to like ignore it and move on with your day because there's so much going on, and like probably they're just having a bad day and they'll get over it. And like maybe if it's a one-off, like maybe that's fine. Maybe we don't need to have, I know I'm a therapist, but I can acknowledge that we don't need to have deep feelings conversations every time and every moment and every encounter. Okay, fine. But when we start to see it being a pattern, or when we start to see the first flicker of it escalating, and this is where I talk to our doctors a lot about what's your intuition telling you? Like you need to listen to your gut and listen to, is something bothering you about this interaction with this patient? And if something's bothering you, that is a sign that you likely need to have a conversation with that patient about that relationship. My favorite word to my supervisees and to our doctors is we've got to meta communicate. We've got to talk about the communication. We've got to talk about the relationship. Because if we just let that go and let that go and let that go, and we can see that they're irritated and they're frustrated and they know that we can see, they know we know, but nobody's talking about it, that's when things start to escalate. And so if there's that nagging feeling in the back of your mind of like, oh, I know this patient's really pissed at me because I didn't, whatever, like, I know many of us are conflict avoidant. I will raise my hand as like the chief among them, but got to deal with it sooner rather than later because it just gets worse. And I think that's where we can have the opportunity to relationally connect and to say like, hey, let's find our shared goals. Let's find what we're working on together and let's get this out in the open. I can see that you're upset with me. And either that's going to improve the relationship or it's not, but it's going to give you some ideas about a path forward instead of things just like escalating under the surface.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think all this nuance, I always say that de-escalation when you're somebody who's not a prescriber is 1,000 times easier. Like I don't have conflicts with patients almost never. Like I can't even, a couple of them were literally, I had never met the person and I walked in and there was hostility. In those cases, you can't take it personal because there's no relationship. There's not, that clearly has nothing to do with you. And so in those cases, you don't take that personal. But as far as, in the clinic, there are folks that have these big behaviors and have them with everybody but me. And I think it's because I have good de-escalation skills. And B, I'm not a prescriber. So if
sucks to be us sometimes.
Because
not all the time.
And they're yelling at their nurse because they want the nurse to somehow, they think they can somehow get the prescriber to prescribe something. Mm-hmm. And they're frustrated with the prescriber because you're not prescribing me whatever it is that they want, or there's this referral that they want. There's some type of thing that they want. And I think as a BHC, they know that we can't give them anything.
In some ways, we have little to offer, and that can work in our favor.
Right. Yeah, there's like and it's funny because if they do think that I can get them something, they're super nice to me. So in most cases, I feel bad because I'm always like, oh, I talked to so-and-so and it went really great, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, they just called yesterday and yelled at us, like, we're going to have to discharge them. And I'm like, no, don't discharge them. Like,
they're super nice.
They're super nice. So one of the things over the years I've learned is like, again, what is the context? What is the function of the behavior? And just because I'm not seeing it, even though I do think I do well with de-escalation strategies, it might not be happening because my context doesn't produce that. There's nothing that they're going to try to get from me. And if they do, they're normally really nice to me because they want me to go talk to the physician about it. I don't know why they're so mean to nurses then, if it's that same logic, but who knows? So that's just something that when I talk to residents as part of like the faculty and teaching is like, you do have to understand that some of this is not that, Jen, right? It's not personal. There's a prescription pad, there's a referral, there's some other thing, there's a letter that they want, there's something that they want. And so it's not personal. And that's easy to say. And it's very difficult to feel and really know. So we just talk about that.
Yeah. And that's why I think that having the BHC, like I'm extremely ill-equipped leaving formal training and like having this, okay, it's not about you, it's not personal. And I mean, shoot, even formal de-escalation. I don't know if I've ever had de-escalation training. I probably have, but I forgot it. And it was on some computer module 10 years ago. You know what I mean? So it's like, we need more of that. We collectively, the medical providers, because I don't know. I just feel like we walk into that all the time, and you do feel like it's me versus you, and I'm the barrier to you getting your script. So you'll, roll over me with, manipulation or intimidation or, and that feels awful. And you go home with that, and then you're like, well, I don't want to go back and do that tomorrow. Or I see you on my schedule next week and I'm like, oh, and I think we set our providers up to have avoidant behavior. I know we do because we're on the time crunch fee for service widget making. So it's like, it's a heck of a lot easier, right?
What's the code for? I had to talk to the patient about the doctor-patient relationship to resolve these lingering resentments.
Here's the time-based code for why benzos are not a good idea for you. Just start the clock. I mean, it's easier just to go refill.
Well,
and it is.
Yes. And speaking of billing and payment models, I think that this is when we talk about the less tangible benefits of integration and BHCs. I mean, when you're talking about the toll this takes on you as a provider, and I think a lot of times the therapist on the team, I heard this from so many people when the program that I work through has been through some major traumas. Longtime listeners will remember. But I got some advice that the therapist on the program is going to become the therapist for the program. So like, be ready for that. And of course we have to maintain our boundaries, but like we, a lot of times are going to be the one to be like, hey, that was a really traumatic thing that happened to you. How are you doing? And just checking in and thinking about, and I think it's the importance of believing each other on our teams. Like you were saying, Bridget, when you have a really different experience with a patient, we want in our team dynamics to be coming to each other with like understanding and like trust, and not to be like, well, I've never had that experience with that patient, so I think they're fine. Because that could be a big problem. That will really erode the dynamics on your team.
Especially if you have a borderline patient who's really good at splitting, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. Like that's part of the whole deal. Like that,
Yes.
The fact that you didn't have that experience is part of the problem.
Yeah.
But I think that we the time that we spend nurturing our teams and taking care of our teams is not time that gets, put in a spreadsheet of how we're, billing for our salary or whatever, but being able to have strong interdisciplinary teams. And of course, the BHC is not the only one that can take care of each other, but having these good teams and having attention to how we're taking care of each other, how we're looking out for each other is such a crucial part of what we need to be doing.
I think personally, it's actually, to me, it's the biggest impact of integrated care, period. End of story. I know we're about patients and we're about patient care, but I think when we look back historically at what the collective impact of integrated care, of embedding behavioral health specialists onto teams, what's the biggest overall impact? I think it's actually on the providers and the team functioning.
Yeah.
Right. And then the team's ability to care more effectively for patients that way. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm a huge believer in that. And I think going back to something you said, Grace, I think there's been so many times when I've had, you don't have to have like a therapy session with a teammate to be helpful. Like there's so many times where I've had just these side conversations, in the provider room, in the hallway outside the exam room, where I could visibly see the provider relax after we just took 3 minutes to debrief what happened with that patient. I can help provide some context maybe that really helps frame the whole story in a different way, that depersonalizes it, as Bridget said, for the provider, and the provider can then just breathe and get on to their next patient and know that they're going to be okay. They're not alone in it. They don't have to take that baggage with them. It's a huge thing. And then there's also like sort of upskilling, right? Because we share skills. I learn from my providers learn from me.
Yes.
And that whole notion of, I was thinking what you said, Bridget, and also Grace, on the avoidance thing. And that's one of the things that keeps me, because I am naturally, especially as a Hispanic, conflict avoidant in those types of interpersonal relationships. But like what keeps me from being more conflict avoidant is my teammates, because I know if I don't help address these meta communication issues that you were talking about, Grace, that's going to hurt my teammate. My teammate's going to have this conversation or deal with the stress and conflict of this. So I need to be courageous and bring it up. I see that you're frustrated because your provider didn't prescribe the benzo. Tell me about why you're frustrated, right? Taking the time to have that conversation means that my teammate either doesn't have to have that conversation or doesn't have to be the first person to broach that conversation. I can break ground on that and mitigate some of that frustration and anger and irritability. And I can put a different context on why we're not prescribing the benzo and why that's not good care, right?
Right.
And so that really, it just helps position me differently, because I naturally do want to avoid those conversations. They're uncomfortable. They're hard. I hate disappointing people.
Yeah.
But I'll do it for my teammate.
Yeah, no, that's true. We need to feel like we're not alone. I think of practices where we don't have integration, where historically I used to practice. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many providers out there that don't have that safety net of someone to bounce it off of, and they feel so isolated, and it's a fix-it profession. So it's either, someone gets mad and disappointed at you, or you hit refill, and it's like, there's got to be better options there, right? Yeah, there's got to be.
Well, and you mentioned trauma earlier, Neftali, and I think when we're talking about this broader umbrella of burnout, compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, and then workplace trauma, the trauma of being a provider in some cases, when you are coming against problems that you can't fix all the time, or sometimes a directly hostile situation or a threat, that can be trauma. And so that's not secondary trauma, that's your own trauma. And we don't like to claim it always, especially as, high functioning healthcare providers. We're like, oh no, not me, never me.
Right.
But we need to acknowledge it. And I loved what you said about debriefing, because that is, the most immediate first thing that we can do for someone who's experienced a potentially traumatic stressor, is to connect, to debrief, to help them ground themselves for a second and reassure their safety. And I think that that is such a key part of, for any of our team members, no matter who you are on the team, if you can look out for each other and provide that momentary connection, and ensuring their safety and support, that's huge.
Of course, huge plug for the contextual interview. That
Woohoo!
because I saw we were running out of time, so we gotta get that.
Gotta get in.
But when we take this contextual approach with our patients, just in general, wanting to get to know them, it can really, the conceptualization that Neftali was talking about and the depersonalization that we've been talking about, it's so much easier to do when you have these pieces of information and you're not trying to fill them in. That person is dealing with X, Y, and Z. We know that they're at the end of their rope because of those reasons. And then maybe we're like the first person that they saw, or they think that there's some type of thing that we're withholding from, as a healthcare system for what they feel they need. And it's so much easier to depersonalize it, not to feel like, oh, well, this is against me, when you know all those factors. When you don't know those factors and someone's like yelling at you, it's, your instincts get, they kick in. So I think that, and de-escalation strategies are so helpful. We do talk about other people's traumas during, like, I've done de-escalation courses a lot, and we're talking about what people are walking in with, all kinds of things that we don't even know about. And those can go a long way, because I've been a part of conversations where I've, seen how things have gone on. And I know that if the healthcare provider, and I'm not trying to blame anybody, but I know that if they would have used different words, like, we would have been okay. Or maybe I step in, we use different words, then we're completely okay. So it's this, I guess what I'm saying is, there's this huge and in the spectrum that we were talking about. Like, there's some situations where it's a one-off, and we don't even know this person, and we don't know what they're going through, and there's nothing that we could have ever done, like Neftali is saying, that it just doesn't exist in healthcare. It was going to happen anyways. And then there's these scenarios that we let go, whereas if we would have had a conversation about the communication, we could have avoided. And then there's these, like, middle ones where if we could have taken a few different, steps, and then maybe that is contextually impacted by whoever's talking to them. Maybe it's easier for me because I don't have a prescription pad. And so maybe we send me in first, like Neftali saying, to break the ground on the conversation. So by the time that they do talk to Jen, who's a prescriber, then it's an easier conversation. So it's a huge, and I agree with Neftali and what you guys all said, that there's just nothing that can be done. And then sometimes I've seen healthcare systems say, oh, there's nothing that could be done. I'm like, well, actually, I think there was probably a lot that could have been done. And we just don't want to, like, lean into and learn new skills because it's hard and everyone's busy. So all the grace and compassion, though, because we're all just trying to survive out here.
And I think it's important also to recognize that we're not saying that de-escalation means everybody's happy, right? I mean, like, at a baseline, de-escalation is just, we talked about the issues. People on both sides felt heard on some level, and we were able to leave on some form of some peaceful state, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that's part of it is just we do feel a lot of discomfort in healthcare because we're a caring profession of disappointing people and people being frustrated. People have a right to be frustrated on both sides. So us as the care team, we can be frustrated. Patients allowed to be frustrated. Patients allowed to not like your decision or your decision making. So that's okay, right? So a lot of those middle ones, I think sometimes we think we failed in those middle cases that we're talking about because the patient's still upset. Like, no, like that's relationship.
Yeah.
Right. That relationships, especially real relationships, like actually intimate relationships, we know from the science, have to incorporate some conflict. It's like any good movie. You have to have a conflict that gets resolved at some point. If you actually don't have any conflict, you don't have any real intimacy. So that's a function of it. You just have to learn how to hold that tension in the relationship. And so I would say maybe a successful de-escalation it could be, we don't agree, we are upset, and we're still in relationship. That's a successful de-escalation. Like the patient's still going to come back and work with us. They may not like us, but we work through it.
Yeah. That's so wise. Yeah. I mean, the competing agendas as the provider too, like that makes so much sense. And then you got your other angel devil on your shoulder going, what about satisfaction scores? Are they going to rate you excellent? And you're like, wait a minute, they're not supposed to rate me excellent. We just had a de-escalation. We're disagreeing. We're going to live to fight another day. They're going to come back. Maybe it's just an okay and you get an average score. Well, that's not good enough. That's going to hurt your productivity and your financial, right? Because there is the for a lot of providers, it's a patient satisfaction is part of your compensation. So, well, how do you serve that master?
Yeah, that's a horrible. That's just a horrible way to define healthcare.
Yep.
It's just
Yep.
patient satisfaction.
There's so many unintended consequences of that.
Yeah.
You know, I was struck by when you were talking, Neftali, that you're talking about boundary work and the boundary work that we need to be doing in terms of our patients' emotions and reactions are theirs to feel. And sometimes we want to, I think more often than worrying about satisfaction and worrying about, like that, those are factors for sure. But I know that you're worried about making your patient have a good experience, making sure that they are taken care of. And sometimes, again, the people pleasing, conflict avoidant part of us feels like that means everybody's happy, but not everybody's going to be happy, and people are going to hurt. And they're going to hurt physically, and they're going to hurt emotionally, and they're going to have pain, and they're going to have feelings, and they're theirs. And we have to let them hold that. And then we have to hold our own and acknowledge our own and figuring out where that space is. And that's so hard to do. But I think having those emotional boundaries are the only way that we can be sustainable in these roles.
I found that being a very, very tangible strategy is being willing to say that we don't know, or as a field that we messed up, we did something wrong, for folks that are like, oh, I was prescribed this for 20 years and now it's been changed on me, to really lean into that and be like, that sounds terrible. You were told to take this thing because it was going to be good. It was supposed to help you. And now the very system who gave that to you is now saying that we can't. And so really, like, I know we get scared of that. And I've talked to some of our physicians and our residents over the years about just admitting, just owning that we as healthcare didn't know, and that we are in a fallible system, and we don't have something for that. And really just putting it out on the table of just like, what you're asking for, I don't even disagree with you. Like, I don't disagree with you, but we don't have something for that. Or the rules changed. We thought it was good. We got more research. It's not. And I cannot with my license. I don't even, and even admitting, like, I don't know what it feels like to be in your situation, but based on everything we've gone over, that sounds horrible that you were placed into this situation.
Yes.
And if I could fix it, my God, I would. But things changed. And then I blame society. I say, you see all these shows where the healthcare system has it all together and have all the
it's
answers.
All perfect.
And
wrap it up in 60 minutes.
Yeah. And I said, the truth of the matter is, it's like a sausage factory. Like, we don't, like, we're doing the best that we can, and we're trying the best that we can, but sometimes it's not great, and we don't have clear answers, and there was mistakes or misinformation or who even knows what. And the patient, as you, got caught in the middle of it. Yeah. And I'm just sorry that happened. And most of the time.
Smart. I love it. Yes.
This has been such a good conversation and so much to think about. And it is definitely running my mind through in terms of some of the takeaway points that we've talked about, like taking care of each other, having clear plan in place for a clinic, for a team when problems happen, doing our own emotional boundary work, focusing on the relationship and intervening with patients early when we can, recognizing what's ours to hold versus what is our patients to hold, and just the importance and the really unique opportunity that we have as integrated care teams to do this work and to take care of our patients and ourselves. So I appreciate you guys so much. As always, I'm thankful for this conversation. Let's go to our ending from Deepu. Thank you, Deepu. Thank you, Jen and Bridget, Neftali. Thank you to all of our listeners, and we'll talk to you again next month. Yay. Thanks,
Yay.
Yeah, great
Good
conversation,
stuff.
guys. That was really helpful.
Yeah.
Very helpful for me.
I feel like all I do is complain. Am I a big old bitch fest on this podcast? No. I was like, it sucks. Being a medical provider is bullshit.
No, you know what? I think that you are affected differently by these issues by nature of your role, and we need your voice so much.
Okay, I hope it comes across as like semi, like informational and not like wah, because I don't want to be wah.
No, not at all.
All right, cool.
And
Good.
it's, I think it's important for people to channel. I didn't talk about it during the podcast, but my wife has been dealing with some burnout. She's
I can't imagine. ER, geez Louise, COVID, holy shit.
No, it's actually worse. It's worse now. It's worse now than it was before. Like hospitals are totally dysfunctional, but by grace.
Yeah.
So
they're very dysfunctional.
You're channeling the angst that a lot of physicians feel. So
all right.
I think people need to hear that.
All right.
Yeah, I'd say just keep being you, because we need to have the voice, and we need to have the reality of the situation, and so you're really in it. Like, we can imagine, myself and Neftali can imagine what it's like to have a prescription pad and the frustration levels, but you're the one who like has somebody yelling in your face. And I've never had somebody yell in my face ever in the 10 years of being a BHC about any of that, because I don't have something to give up.
Right. Yeah.
I have had people get mad at me, but not as often as my, primary care provider colleagues.
Really?
Yeah.
And I think we minimize it. We're like, oh, it wasn't that bad. Somebody else had it worse. There are people that have been shot and killed at work. That didn't happen to me. So my thing wasn't. I mean, is that like I don't know. That's you're the psychologist. That's probably some kind of coping mechanism, right? To minimize.
You got it.
Yep. Shit.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Oh well, but no, it's good.
Hopeful for the long term, probably, but
yeah.
In the moment, you feel better.
In the moment, yes. No, but it's super good. It's great to hear you guys talking about this stuff. My organization doesn't talk about this shit at all. Like, we're like, productivity scores, blah blah blah, and it's just such a breath of fresh air. I thank God I've met y'all, and for CFHA. I mean, I can't believe that there's more providers that don't know about it. It's been a lifesaver for me. Where I'm just like, there's good stuff happening, and I don't feel so damn alone and so crazy for saying maybe this isn't the way we should be doing things. It's just fucking great. So I just want more people to know about it.
Nice. Well, we'll keep
working on it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Good
Bye,
seeing you
guys.
guys. Have a great day.
See you
All
guys.
Have a great day.
Take care. Bye.
See ya.